Howdy, I'm Jason Mark, and I'm substitute teaching today for Edible Education. We're talking with Chris Kerston from the Savory Institute. Chris, so I guess first of all, tell me a little bit about your background as a rancher. Before working for Savory, you were a rancher in the Sacramento Valley.
Yeah, so I've ranched all over Northern California and also worked in orchards and farming systems. And then for about 7 years, I ran a farm just outside of Oroville that was 2,000 acres, had 600 acres of orchards. It was actually the largest old growth planting of olives in North America, and we grazed livestock in the orchard. So the sheep and the cows basically become your mowers, chickens debug and fertilize, goats handle all your invasive weeds. And so we cut our fuel usage by like 85%, ran on a very small crew of people. Everything became very synergized and symbiotic.
So when folks hear of a system that's got cattle and sheep and goats and chickens grazing beneath old growth orchards, they might kind of think holistic management, and this might be a buzzword or buzz phrase that they've heard. So what is holistic management? What does that mean? Holistic
management is actually a decision-making framework that you're looking at overcoming complexity by looking at the social, environmental, and economic impact simultaneously when making a decision. And I know that's a lot to chew off there, but it's basically triple bottom line, people, profit, planet, all these different buzzwords, but where you're overcoming that complexity by looking at everything all at once with the knowledge that you have at hand.
But fundamentally, it's a system, right, that's kind of based in large part around ranching, right, and around sort of returning grazers to the land. Is that right?
So it had its roots in ecology, and it was started by Alan Savory. Many people might have seen his TED Talk. It's one of the top 100 most popular of all time. It's got like 4 million views as of right now. But yeah, so there's a background in livestock and ecology. The movement is actually much bigger than that. But what we at the Savory Institute focus on is on grassland restoration. We think they are the most critical habitat for the sake of humanity and for civilization to continue the way that it is, and they're often the least championed. There's very few people out there that are out there hugging the grass and saving the grasslands, and so that's what we focus on, is that global restoration.
Okay, so that's a big claim. Restoring grasslands is the future of humanity and the future of civilization. So right. You've got to break that out for me. How so?
So grasslands hold the largest amount of carbon in their soil, second to oceans. In oceans, it's a liability just like it is in the atmosphere. They recharge water systems faster and deeper than any other ecosystem on the planet. And it's where we often develop the most. All of the grain and agricultural regions of the world are former grasslands. It's a huge part of what holds civilization together, is this glue, is grasslands, and they just don't get enough press. They don't get talked about enough.
Don't get enough love.
That's right.
Love your grasslands.
Love the grasslands.
And so part of the sort of thinking behind the holistic management, at least around the grazers part of it, is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, for these grasslands to thrive, you need to have grazers on them, as it traditionally would have been. You would have had, probably traditionally ungulates or some, large bison or mule deer or elk or, I don't know, taiga antelope or something out there. Right. And now we've displaced those from the land. So what happens to the soil then?
So what happens is it all actually comes down to biological decay. We need the biomass that grasslands produce to biologically decay. In places where it's humid all year round, how they biologically decay is just through microbes in the soil. But the key is in places, and this is about 2/3 of the world, where there's a season of wetness and rainfall and precipitation and humidity, and then a season of dryness, is those microbes in the soil have to go dormant. And this is where nature employs large groups of herbivores, those ungulates that you talk about, that they actually have the microbes in their gut, and they break down the grass when they eat it, which allows room for new growth to come back next year, instead of for it to thatch out and then shade future growth from occurring. So they actually perform a role of a positive catalyst. They come in and they remove that biomass. It biologically decays. It becomes available to the soil when it comes out their backside as manure, and it enhances the whole cycle, and it keeps this kind of lub-dub cycle of graze, rest, graze, rest. We've broken that in the way that we farm today, and the way that we've got conventional livestock systems where we've got large open spaces that are, the animals are sedentary, they're not moving, they're not mimicking nature's patterns, and we see those areas decay tremendously.
And or it's a monocrop of corn and soy.
Yeah. On the flip side, though, we have places where there's tremendous rest, where we've put and we've fenced off areas as preserves, and we have no positive impact happening from animals, and we see similar decay and decline in those environments as well.
So I'm totally with you, and I can follow along quite clearly that, yes, you'd have, traditionally meaning for millennia, having grazers on the landscapes and on grassland landscapes. I guess my question, though, is that, are all grazers created equal? I mean, it seems to me there's a big difference between, say, again, an ungulate like a deer or an elk, and a ruminant like a cow or a goat. I mean, aren't they going to have different sort of impacts on the grass in some way?
I don't really think so. I think that the bigger impact is how they're managed. How long are they there, and how long are they gone? And how are we mimicking nature's cycles? So every ecosystem on the planet has animals play a positive role in that. I think that we want our food systems to mimic nature, and if we're going to do that, animals need to play a positive role in the same way. And so I think it's less about the size of the tool. I think that's a little bit the way our human brain works, but when you're nature, you could have a whole bunch of deer on a piece of property, and now we're thinking of how many pounds of animals per acre.
Yeah.
It's more relative to the size of the actual animal.
The size of the actual, but I mean that then does get into something like, you look at a cow which has got roughly 80 pounds per square inch of force in its hoof, and a mule deer, it's got 8 pounds of, 8 pounds per square inch of force in its hoof. I mean, that's going to have a different impact, right, on your soil compaction, your soil microbes, the whole deal.
I think it comes a lot further down the line than when we're looking at the bigger picture of we've got a lot of land that's being overgrazed and mismanaged, and we've got a lot of land that's being undergrazed and mismanaged because we're not mimicking the way nature's patterns go. Nature has all different size animals for a reason.
So let's talk about the overgrazing, the undergrazing. So in the prescriptions are sort of set out, or the model of thinking in the Savory Institute in holistic management, what do you recommend? I mean, what do you think that Goldilocks sweet spot is between undergrazing and overgrazing?
So it's going to vary for every piece of land and for every individual that's managing that land. So what are their resources that they have? What can they do? What is their land like? What is the climate like? What is happening with that microbial activity in the soil? All of that's going to be contextual, and so you've got to figure that out first. I know everybody wants a prescriptive piece, and I wish that we just had one we could give them.
It's very site-specific, landscape-specific.
It's landscape-specific, but also specific to the goals of the individual there, too. For a long time, we saw big NGOs go out and give prescriptive information, and if it didn't meet the cultural needs of the individual, then they didn't really own it and be part of it. So we have to make sure that they own it, that it meets their life goals as well. And so holistic management, we deal with all of those issues in what's called a holistic context, to where you've got that social, cultural piece, the environmental piece, and the economic piece all tied together.
I guess another question is, because I've been to a holistic management workshop, and I have heard some ranchers say, wow, this is great, but I don't have the person power to do this. I can't be moving my animals around this much. Like I just don't have that much manpower.
And that's where it's contextual, because there is no prescription that says you have to put 1 million pounds of animals per acre and move them every 2 hours. It's totally contextual to the resources that you have, the amount of money you have in your bank, how involved you want to be in the operation. All of those things are going to come into play. And so that's why we are very careful to not give prescriptions for that very reason. But in almost everywhere that we can go, we can double your stocking rate within the first couple of years, and we can drastically turn around your finances. Many places, their relationships are broken between either the next generation or spouses. We'll address all of those things at once because they're all part of a bigger root issue.
Fantastic. Anything else you want to share with us?
I'm just so glad to be here. Thank you.
Chris, thanks so much for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me.
That's Chris Kerston from the Savory Institute, and I'm Jason Mark here with Edible Education.